Inevitably, each year when I'm helping clients file tax returns, I'll get a question about an incorrect tax form. A W-2, one of the varieties of 1099s. The client will tell me something about their situation. We realize, wait, this isn't reporting this correctly. The most recent example that comes to mind is a W-2 for a client who had moved actually 2 years ago, and the state withholdings hadn't gotten updated when they moved out of state. So their W-2 reflected the incorrect state income amounts, and so there were large dollars involved. They were a high earning couple, and so we're not talking about a few $100s to the wrong state, we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars. And so then their question was, hey, can we go ahead and file the return reflecting what really happened, or do we have to file a return that matches the W-2? And like so many tax situations, this gets a little bit nuanced. There isn't an automatic, here's how it's gonna work in every situation. Because ideally, we're going to go and get a corrected tax form. That's where I always wanna start. Whether it's a W-2 or a 1099, I wanna go back to whoever issued the tax form, explain the situation, provide whatever supporting documentation I need to, and I wanna get a corrected form because a copy of those forms goes to the IRS as well. And so it's going to work out better if we have the corrected form on file so our tax return matches what our employer, what our custodian reported to the IRS. Now, there are times where that might not feel feasible. It's a former employer and they're not feeling particularly helpful. The custodian tells you that's just not possible. We come across these things and then we get into the situation, it almost feels like a game of chicken of which one's going to go first. So again, my preference is we go and ask for the corrected form. That might even mean that we're gonna extend the tax return to give ourselves more time to get the corrected form on file and to proceed that way, which would be the ideal way to do it. Now, if we're working in a situation where we know we're not going to get a corrected form, we've just been told, hey, we're just not something we're gonna do, they don't agree with the support you provided, or unfortunately what I see more commonly is sorry, that's just not something we're gonna do. You absolutely can file a tax return that doesn't agree with the tax form that was issued. You can file a tax return. I have filed tax returns that don't agree with the W-2 on file. But if you're going to do that, you have to go in knowing, and for me as a tax professional, I make it really clear to my clients, hey, if we're filing a tax return that doesn't agree with the tax documents, almost guaranteed the IRS is gonna send us a love letter. They're gonna send us a letter that says, hey, our records don't match your return and we think we need to adjust your return. Can you provide any evidence to the contrary? And when that happens, we're absolutely gonna provide that evidence. We're going to write a letter explaining the situation. We're gonna provide any backup that supports our case. And this is going to be a long drawn out process. It's probably gonna take weeks, if not months, for the IRS to catch the issue and to send it to us. It's gonna take weeks, if not months, for them to respond to our follow-up letter. But ultimately, as long as we can support our case, we can get that alternative accepted, even if it doesn't agree with the original documentation. It's just a long drawn out process and not ideal. If we're going to extend a tax return to wait for these corrected forms, we've got to remember that the taxes that are ultimately due are still due by April 15th. The extension gives us additional time to file the return. It does not give us additional time to pay. And so we have to do a risk assessment of how likely we think it is that the tax return is going to be accepted the way that we ultimately want to file it. And then make an estimate of how much is due on April 15th to go ahead and pay that with the extension. So I know I've said it a few times already, but I just want to really reinforce it, that if we get a tax document that we think is in error, the best first course of action is to request a corrected document so that when the IRS gets a copy of that, it matches what we're putting on the tax return. But at the end of the day, just because you got an incorrect form does not mean you have to file an incorrect tax return or a tax return that doesn't match what happened in real life. Also is a good reminder of why it's important to keep great records and documentation of the things we do in life so that if questions come up, when questions come up, we can support our answers and make sure that we get the outcome that we're looking for. So we want to have a plan, we want to execute that plan. Happy tax planning.